My name is Ann Weills. I'm a civil rights lawyer. Prior to working on with my co-counsel, the Ashker v. Brown, the litigation where we're trying to basically stop solitary confinement in the SHU, I litigated for over 20 years against the University of California, Stanford, and other academic institutions in terms of discrimination in tenure and other matters. But before we start, I would like to read a statement from the prisoners at Pelican Bay who are not allowed to be here, either audio or by video. And and along with myself, they want to send their high regards to both of you, both Assemblyman Amiano and Senator Hancock, for your role, your very committed and very honorable role in terms of ending the hunger strike in September this year. And your promise of these hearings and obviously this ongoing process is extraordinary. And I think we are in 2014 in an amazing kind of synergy between the litigation that we're involved in, your work trying to change the conditions of the SHU and solitary in California, as well as all the ideas and the movement we have in California, family members, activists, and the prisoners themselves. So you're very much appreciated, and we really want to be part of that process and appreciate you involving us in that. So these words were sent to me by Satawa Jama, Todd Ashker, Arturo Castellanos, and Antonio Guillen, who are the four main prisoner hunger strike representatives at Pelican Bay, who with others called for the last peaceful protest and starved until the end. That was almost 60 days. Quote, "We are prisoners at Pelican Bay State Prison who have all lived for over 15 years, locked 23 hours a day in small windowless cells without ever being able to hug or touch our families, without ever seeing birds, trees, or the outside world, with no programs or chance for parole. California keeps us in these torturous conditions not because of any violence we have committed, but because it believes we are affiliated with a gang, often based on artwork or photos we possess, tattoos we have, literature we read, who we talk to, or anonymous informants and their statements that we have no way of challenging. We are put in Pelican Bay not for any specific terms of months or years for misconduct we have committed, but indefinitely, which in practice means forever, unless we become informants. Last summer, we went on hunger strike. As you know, over 30,000 people went out. We are willing to starve ourselves to death rather than continue to endure these dehumanizing conditions forever. We ended the strike because several compassionate legislators promised to call the hearings that are taking place today. Yet today, the legislators will hear from psychologists, lawyers, other experts, corrections officials, but not from us, who have the most experience with the conditions we face, because California CDCR prison officials refuse to let us testify even remotely via video or audio, which they could easily do. So this is our banned testimony. CDCR claims to have now instituted a reform program. It is a sham, just like the so-called reform they instituted a decade ago after a court settlement which resulted in no real change. This new reform effort still maintains the basic conditions at Pelican Bay and will continue to keep prisoners in isolation for vague gang affiliation based on artwork, literature, communications, or informants' testimony that does not meet California's judicial standards for reliability in criminal trials. California is still unwilling to move to a real behavior-based system where prisoners are given determinate terms in solitary after due process hearings at which they are found guilty of some serious misconduct, such as an assault, murder, rape, or drug dealing. Instead, these new policies widen the net of prisoners who can be labeled as gang affiliates and isolated based on that label. These unjust and ineffective policies are very expensive and have already cost our state millions of tax dollars, which could be put to better use. Moreover, even those prisoners who need to be isolated from the general population because of the violence they have committed while in prison ought to be treated humanely. There is no reason California can't run very high-security prisons that allow prisoners held in segregation to have contact visits with family, phone calls to family and friends, educational and rehabilitation programs, more out-of-cell time, cells with windows, recreational yards that allow for small groups to recreate together and see the outside world. In short, segregation from the general population, but not torture or dehumanization. We have written petitions and letters to the governor, filed a class action federal lawsuit, and gone on hunger strikes seeking real reform, not the bogus reform California officials now propose. It's time for California to do the right thing. It's time for the legislature to enact meaningful reforms. And because of the time limits, I am just going to, and given I don't want to be redundant given what Charles and some of the other speakers have said. So I do want to talk, though, about rehabilitation. And in many ways, so I'm going to jump to that, and I am going to review a few of my notes because I think that is where we are in terms of how to make any kind of transitional program from people being isolated in the SHU for decades into civil society. And in this step-down program, there's no consistent rehabilitation or education integrated into this program, despite CDCR's statement of commitment. Recently, 2 older men at Pelican Bay were transferred directly to the main line after decades in the SHU with no orientation or traditional programming. They did not fare well. One block at Pelican Bay reported their GED had been on hold for 6 months. Most prisoners cannot afford college courses, even if there is a proctor to monitor. We do know of other states that have best practices, for example. The model Connecticut step-down program offers anger management, life skills, and ethics education, plus an interactive approach over a year through service providers who are dedicated, and this is really critical, to bringing a prisoner back from long-term solitary to their humanness. I mean, you've heard already today Professor Haney and others talk about how people are fundamentally changed, both psychologically and physically, as a result of being in the SHU. And at least Connecticut recognizes that, and they attempts to begin that process of bringing them back to being in civil society. Yet in CDCR's pilot program, I won't go into the sections, there's nothing intended for the first 2 steps, and this idle warehousing is a numbing violence against the human spirit. And this is Cruel and Unusual book by Colin Dinan. We know that many prisoners are refusing to do the self-directed journals because they consider them a self-incriminating shame and blame curriculum. The information they provide will go into their central files and can be used against them. In fact, CDCR has offered contradictory positions as to whether participating in this self-directed journals portion of the step-down program is mandatory. Well, actually, Ms. Hubbard said it was mandatory this morning. The themes in this program deal with thinking errors, social values, and peer relationships, but they begin with an assumption of guilt, self-loathing, and character invalidation. Prisoners are labeled failures if they do not program the way staff wants them to. This is not rehabilitation, which requires bringing in social workers, psychologists, teachers, and vocational counselors to help transition these men. As one prisoner says, quote, in order to successfully complete this aspect of the step-down program, you must be willing to accept and believe all of the absolute worst things that the state has said about us all and continues to say, and invalidate yourself completely. There is no set of circumstances in which any principled person would agree to aid the state in carrying out such an insidious, vile, and patently evil process. The culture of those who control SHU placement and living conditions has not changed in the new regulations. CDCR has not revealed the training that officers are receiving for the new step-down program, nor so it is feared they will continue to see inmates as animals and unworthy of dignity or rehabilitation. Well, then why should inmates trust this new program? Again, using Connecticut as a best practices example, the culture was changed before the new step-down program was initiated, a program that has seen the end of their supermax, a substantive and substantial drop in violence, and great cost savings to the state. And employees who were asked if they wanted to participate in this new culture and, basically sensitizing them and educating them as to how to inspire these prisoners into this step-down program, these officers, the officers who were not amenable to being part of that interaction with the step-down program, were transferred to other jobs, but no jobs were lost to personnel in Connecticut. Now, Norway, and I have in my notes a longer discussion of Norway. Norway is a state, albeit not the state of the United States, but they wrestled with these issues many, many decades ago. And Norway, in a very conscious, organized way, moved from a vengeance model to a philosophy where they had a stake in advancing the development of the human beings that they had in their custody, even their so-called worst of the worst. They have a whole long developed program where they basically put them in a natural human setting where they have, anyway, I don't have time to go into it. But Norway is an extraordinary example where, and the philosophy is not just being nice guys. It's they think that if they improve the opportunities for the prisoners to them personally, but that will help them contribute to the society, because once they come out, they're fuller human beings and able to cope and respond, in civilized society and become good parents, fathers, etc. We destroy people in the system right now, and they don't come out whole. And so I would look to Norway too, although that's maybe too far advanced for the United States, but it's something to look at for California.
Follow the caribou.
Yeah. The Virginia Department of Corrections has developed a specific model for prison culture change, applying the principles of evidence-based practices. And you heard about that with the former speakers. One of the most compelling aspects about this program and that of Connecticut is that they see their success is tied to a real internal culture change, raising staff consciousness toward a more positive and nurturing attitude, gaining trust, and that's an essential aspect, of course, and inspiring inmates to succeed. Without humane reframing, California SHU prisoners will continue to suffer the constitutional tortures endemic to a corrections culture that violates human dignity and self-worth, because there is no outside oversight, little accountability or transparency. And although I had it in my former remarks, I absolutely think that there has to be an independent, neutral person outside CDCR, an administrative law judge, somebody where there's evidence produced, where people have a right to defend themselves against the charges, the secrets that they have held against them all these years, and so that it is a fair hearing process.
All
so
right.
I highly recommend that.
Thank you.
And I'll stop. Anyway.
I really appreciate and respect your combination and all your hard work.
Well, thank you.
All your hard work. For both of you, it's just kind of a softball question, but devil's advocate kind of question. I think that within this attempt from the CDCR, there might be some good direction occasionally. And if there's anything that you think that is, and we could amplify with them, maybe you could tell us now. I'll tell you full disclosure. I do think that some of the things a lot of it is lip service. There may be a trajectory or two that we might embrace, but I still think the regulations miss the point of the context of what we're talking about, which is the whole existence of the SHU in the first place. And regulations then presume that entity. And what if that entity isn't there, particularly in the form that it is now? So it's kind of counterintuitive to me to come up with regulations based on something in and of itself that is highly questionable.
I would agree. I mean, it's so highly flawed, the whole system of how people are validated and how they come to be in the SHU forever. And obviously the evidence is that a number of them, 60 how many percent, should have never been there in the first place.
65.
But I do think that there is, having litigated against the University of California, these bureaucracies are very hard to change. These are big systems. There's a lot about jobs. I think that's been a huge thing with CDCR over the years. It's build more prisons, create more jobs, and I think that's still a problem. With what Charles said, some of these new regs that now CDCR has jurisdiction beyond CDCR. They can go into any community like Oakland, where I'm from, and say, 64th Avenue gang, over 3 people do XYZ, sell dope in the corner. They can be brought into the SHUs of California. You're talking about 1,500 new organizations.
Okay.
So, what is this but a huge jobs effort?
Thank you.